And welcome to the audience to the plenary session 4 example of Youth Voice into Policy, Youth Call for Action, and Jordan Open Letter will be the experience that we will talk about. I will invite to our first speaker, Amos Amanubo, who is a research fellow at the African Center of Green Economy. His current research is focused on accelerating energy access as a precursor of the just transition among vulnerable communities. He holds a bachelor in forestry and also a master in philosophy and environment, society and sustainability at the University of Cape Town. Amos previously worked as a FAO under the World Forestry Congress Secretariat as a youth outreach and liaison specialist and successfully coordinate global youth engagement for this Congress. He's also a former president of IPSA. So Amos, I will give you the floor. You will have 15 minutes for your presentation. So please go ahead.
Thank you very much, Nicholas, for that wonderful introduction. Good afternoon, everyone online joining us online. Good afternoon from Uganda, and good morning, good evening, wherever you are, and good afternoon as well. Already, the previous speakers have said have given us an impeccable background into, international forest policy scene in terms of the processes, the organizations, providing insights into the structure, governance, and function. I've been attending the previous session, so it was quite very interesting for me. Speakers such as Helen also highlighted the imperative of forming policy groups and communities of practice, such as the Forest Owners Association that was just mentioned. These are the high-level pictures that have been mentioned and how important they are in bridging policy making and practice, and the different interlinkages and synergies. This message was also further reinforced, of course, from previous speakers as well, in terms of how women are coalescing to make their inclusion possible in policy and governance processes. What I've heard from the previous speakers, I'm just trying to build into the substance of the presentation for this afternoon. What I've highlighted from the previous speakers mainly is the point of collective rights as a leverage. And this now builds on into the youth call to action. It was not a single youth, it was a group of youth, many youth that produced this call to action. And also, the immediate past speaker, Jesse Mahoney, set the scene for for the crucial role, the crucial and undeniable role of youth in the international forest policies, how to tap and unlock your potential, how to be the best version of yourself in these spaces. And this speaks to the gist of the youth call to action. So the question that I have that I think I want to share with us today, if you also have questions, you can put them through, is what should we do as young people? What can we do and what should we do? How can we contribute? That's a very important question. We always face these challenges when we come into these spaces of, so what can you give? I mean, Jesse just said previously that we should also come with solutions in whatever capacity. So how can we contribute locally and globally to the forest policy scene? What needs to be done by us? I'm just going to give a brief background into the youth call to action. The youth call to action was endorsed and at the World Forestry Congress, at the 15th World Forestry Congress in Korea. The aim of the youth call to action, in a nutshell, this highlights the need for the meaningful inclusion, participation, and recognition of youth and young professionals in the forest sector. So those are three key words. But there is a lot to do with these three keywords. The youth call to action was developed in terms of the process or the procedure. It was developed collectively by a group of youth under the WFC Youth Coalition. It was led by the UNFF MGCY, the major groups, children and youth, that was directly led by Erica Dijorolami, my colleague, who is not here now. In a coalition with IFSA, with Youth for Nature, with YPAD, with the forestry young professionals, of course, with very immense support from the World Forestry Congress Secretariat, as well as from the Korean Forest Service, the Korean government. And the call to action has 4 key, just to give an insight into the call to action and what it constitutes. The link will be shared here shortly. It has 4 key asks or 4 key calls. The first one is, in a summary, access to high quality forest education and training. This is for the meaningful inclusion and participation of youth in the forest sector. If we are well equipped, if we are well educated, if we are up to date with the knowledge in the forest sector, then it's likely that our inclusion and sense of belonging will be easy. The call to action also highlights the decent work, the need for decent work and career development. We all know, many of us know, that forestry is probably one of the most dangerous, careers or professions to take if you work in the forest or so. And how can we make this decent, and how can we promote career development for young people is another question. Then the third question, the third ask from the call to action is the call for political participation and representation. And I think this is one of the most relevant to this particular Youth Forest Policy Day, because this particularly speaks directly to the policy processes. And then the last one, which I will also build on later, is the call for action on gender equality and empowerment of young women in the forest sector. I'll share a little bit of an insight, a personal background about this shortly as well. So just to move forward, to conceive this youth call to action, it was a very rigorous process that took nearly 2 years of working with the different youth groups, the collective rights that I mentioned, of working with different youth groups and leveraging existing political stakeholders, political will rather, from stakeholders that have the resources to support this kind of work. And these 2 years of work, towards the end, involved a series of regional consultations in Asia Pacific, Latin America, the Caribbean, Africa, and Europe, just to try to mobilize this momentum, just to try to mobilize these collective rights, to mobilize as many youth, as many young people and young professionals as possible, to even give more legitimacy to the voice that would come out of this process. These regional consultations sort of highlighted a lot of key issues, the issues that I just mentioned previously about access to education, career, gender, and political participation. These were issues that were brought to the fore through these regional consultations. So we are going direct to the local and asking the people at the local through these consultations, what is it like? What is the meaning? What is the inclusion, participation of youth in the forest sector like in your region? And we got a lot of narratives from Latin America, from all these regions. And it was very interesting insights to learn that there were very different, views being passed from the different regions. It was not a uniform thing. For instance, from Africa, we had one of the most challenging things was decent employment, career development, and education. These were one of the biggest challenges for youth in the forest sector. Whereas in Europe, it was a very different thing. In the Mediterranean region, there were calls for gender empowerment, gender equality and empowerment of young people. This was a different perspective that didn't exist in other regions. If you went to the Latin America, there were also calls for the mainstreaming of indigenous youth voices. So we see we're trying to bring together these different local voices to the fore and to bring it to a global stage. And we are thankful to the World Forestry Congress Secretariat for having given the stage to bring these local voices to the World Forestry Congress. But this is just, okay, it's a declaration now. It's a youth call to action. It's there. It's a paper. It's on the website. What next? There is, of course, in terms of the procedure and the process, there was, of course, a lot of work to do. We had to start lobbying to see who is willing to adopt this call to action, who is willing to support the plight of youth in these 4 highlighted areas, which stakeholders are there. And thankfully, we were able to get this call also brought to as an outcome of the World Forestry Congress. We were able to bring this call to the Committee on Forestry, COFO 26, that happened in October in Rome, and it was very, very, very fulfilling to see a number of COFO is a member state for your just for the information. COFO is a member state based body, and it was very fulfilling to see, in terms of international community impressions, to see a number of countries actually support or endorse this call to action to support the cause of youth in the forest sector. It's not something that happens overnight. I think Jesse also previously highlighted it. It's a very long process to actually get something done in this policy space. But every single step builds on, and every single step gives you momentum. It takes a lot of patience. It takes a lot of hard work and dedication and lobbying as well. As youth, you keep in that space and keep pushing it through. That was just a snapshot about the youth call to action. And it's here, it's a document, but it's not just a paper document on a website. It's the voices of hundreds of youth around the world about what the forest sector should look like for them. The link will be shared. I'm hopeful the link will be shared shortly. But then the most important question is, why was such a process important? Why was all this work important? I think the first question that I have to ask is, in terms of encouraging participation of young people in the forest sector or in the forest policymaking arena, is that it is very, very important for each one of you to participate in this forest policymaking arena. And this was just one of the ways in which we were trying to push the youth agenda to this space. There's so many things that get discussed in the forest policy arena. There's lots of things. The agenda is usually packed, and in many stages, you might see that issues about youth either get relegated to the bottom, or it might become trivial. It depends on the space that you are in. So it's very important for us as young people, as youth, who are interested in having a sense of belonging in the forest sector, to actually participate in forest policy making processes on two fronts. It's very difficult to participate usually as someone who changes the policy, but it is possible to participate as someone who challenges the process, or as a learner, someone who is there to build your own capacity to learn these processes, and then to step back and begin to think of how you can contribute to transform the system. So it is important for you to be in that space. It's important for young people to get their voices heard. Otherwise, from experience, not so many people actually stand in the gap for young people, because there's so many crucial things, equally crucial things on the agenda. I've mentioned policy learning as a very crucial thing for you to build your experience in these spaces. Through this youth call to action process, I learned a lot. I learned a lot through IFSA, as participating in the different policy processes, just as the previous speakers have also learned a lot. I was able to also understand the power of collective leverage as young people. What can you achieve? Your voice and your vote for a shared understanding of youth perspectives is a very important thing. How do you share your voice, and how do you transform your collective rights into a vote, especially at the local levels? It's at global levels, it might be quite difficult, quite a conundrum to cause a policy shift. But at very local levels, where there is a very considerable number of youth, if you put yourselves into a collective group, you become the electorate, and politicians count on you for votes. And that is where you begin to use your collective leverage and transform it into your asks. What do you want? What is your call for these leaders? That is where you begin to have the power. But then also, what is important for you to move forward as a group, if you have put yourselves together in this collective, collective rights group or community of practice or youth group, such as IFSA, such as, YPAD and so on. What is important? I think it is important to identify supportive partnerships with a dedicated political will to engage youth in all circles of governance, if not all, at least most. This also speaks to a process of transparency. But then, particularly about the youth call to action, it was very important. Political will was very, very important. We got this willingness from the WFC Secretariat to support the process. We got this willingness from the Korean government to support the process. And we use that as a leverage. We got this willingness from the COFO Secretariat to have it there as part of the WFC youth, as part of the WFC outcome. So identifying supportive partnerships. These could be peers within your youth groups to support your vision, or these could be higher stakeholders to also support that, who have the will to support and push for your vision. To push for your vision equally involves also institutionalizing mechanisms of youth participation. That's something that we have tried to achieve through this youth call to action. The whole process of conceiving the youth call to action was actually also part of how can we institutionalize youth participation? How can we make it an institutional thing? Also, getting your voices heard is very, very important for inclusive procedures. We always say that, the problems that we're trying to address, the environmental problems, climate change, and so on, is not discriminative. It doesn't say, oh, your youth, I'm not going to affect you. I'm going to affect the elderly people. It affects everyone equally. Even young people have a very higher stake because they have to live in a future where ecosystem services and goods have been degraded, where forests have been degraded. So it is important for you to share your voices and participate in these policymaking processes for inclusive procedures that reflect your vision for your own future, so that you don't end up living in a future that was designed for you, but you end up living in a future that you designed for yourselves collectively. It's also important in terms of these inclusive procedures for you to participate in these policy-making processes in order to break structural and systemic barriers and inequalities and discrimination as well. And also to highlight it's a form of self-empowerment for yourselves. I think in terms of the structural and systemic inequalities and discrimination and why it is linking that to why it is important for us young people to participate in policymaking processes, I just want to reflect quickly back to the point I made about gender. That was very much highlighted in the youth call to action as one of the key points in terms of gender empowerment, gender equality, and empowerment of young women in the forest sector. I come from Uganda. That's where I am currently. And when I was studying forestry, there was very few ladies, very few women, females in my class. There was about 4 in a class of several people. We're about a class of 40 or so. And that alone would make someone think twice. What are we doing to promote, gender in forestry? Even in the workspaces that I've ended up in forestry, I've been able to witness this gender gap in forestry. And so you participating in these kind of processes helps to push this agenda of how can we promote gender equality? How can we empower young women in the forest sector? How can we raise their voices? How can we break those structural and systemic barriers? How can we avert those inequalities? This is where your contribution starts to come in. So it is very, very important for us to get our voices shared first. I believe that a lot of work and quite some significant work has been done about gender. And I understand that IFSA has also done a very significant work in terms of gender. And I will leave this to the next sessions to unpack a little bit more about that. Thank you.
Thank you, Amos, for your presentation and also for mentioning details such as difference between the regions and also this last issue about gender, the topic that leads me to our next speaker, who is already with us, Teresa Clara Koch, who is the current head of the IPSA Gender Subcommission and also co-author of the IPSA Open Letter on Gender and Forest Education. She has been engaged in several initiatives of gender inequalities since the beginning of her study. And in 2021, she joined the Gender Subcommission and is actively working towards an inclusive forest education and gender awareness within the forest sector. Currently, she's a PhD student and the chair of the Forest and Environment Policy at the University of Freiburg in Germany. So thank you, Teresa, for being with us today. You will have 10 minutes for your presentation. So I give you the floor.
Hi, thank you. Let me just share my screen. Okay. Let me. Perfect. So I think you should see it in presentation modus now. Yes, so I will introduce today the open letter on gender and forest education. Just a quick heads up, today I will mainly talk about the idea, the process, the result, and the next steps, but heavily focusing on the process. So I will not go into why gender equality is so important in forest education. I can happily send you more information on that or reach out to us. The contact details will follow later. But today I really want to talk about how this process started and how it continues. So coming to the idea, I do not want to start without also including other forestry student voices. So the work which has been done is not just my voice, but also the voice of other people. And therefore I would just start with a few quotes, and especially just to give you a heads up on what is happening and a little bit more insights from actually female students joining and showing what is happening. So one of the quotes we had at a workshop last year is, "I've never seen any female professor, not just in my class, but in my whole country during my studies." Or gender inequality affects education. You are not allowed to do certain stuffs, e.g. measurements, if you're not considered a male. And the forestry sector is a very male normative, and people of all genders are expected to conform to those norms and be more masculine in a certain way. So I just want to introduce this at the beginning to let you know that gender equality is something which is affecting so many forestry students every single day, and not just a point which we discuss in politics, but really something which is important on the practical implementation and daily life of forestry students. But coming back to how this idea started. So IPSA co-organized the Forest and Women's Hand Conference in 2021, which was basically the starting point of the Gender Subcommission. And that happened because a lot of young IPSA members then shared experience and knowledge and worked together on the gender equality issue. So this momentum of everybody being excited about the topic and talking about it, sharing experience, the shared motivation was basically then used to establish the IPSA Gender Subcommission due to a high interest and a great support by IPSA itself. So since the term 2021, we have a Gender Subcommission and the goal is to raise awareness on gender in forestry and to provide learning opportunities, which is also very important. From the beginning, the idea of having this open letter was there and was then basically further on worked in the Gender Subcommission. So when the first time Barbara and I in 2021 discovered what we want to do in the term, the open letter was the first thing which was on the list. And just to make you aware a little bit of it as well, is we had this idea of the open letter was there before, but through having an IPSA Gender Subcommission, we actually gained a lot of access to resources, knowledge, experiences of networks within IPSA, which was just a very great base for then being able to just focus on the content of the open letter. Already coming to the process. So It was very important for us that we really learned from each other. So from the beginning on, the open letter was something where we, in the first few meetings, Barbara and I mainly talked about why it is important to us. We shared experience, personal, but also academic-wise. We read a lot of things, and we just got together to see why this is so important for us. We not only learned from each other, but we also learned about each other and sharing our motivation and why we are here. Of course, we had regular meetings and outreach, and not only the meetings were important, but also talking to other people. Of course, I'm from Germany. I have a certain background. Barbara, the head of gender subcommission in the term 2021-22, was from Austria. So of course, we have a very wide European perspective on things. So it was very important for us to get insights from other countries because we wanted this open letter to be supported internationally. Therefore, we set certain milestones and continuously worked with them. But I think in every process, and I'm sure like people had said that before today, you have to revise milestones. Like you want to be optimistic and work on things, but you should always be transparent and realistic about what you can achieve and continuously see how the process goes and what is important for you. So overall, I think there are like 3 main points which I will highlight now, which were important for us throughout this process of writing an open letter. The first one was definitely the high internal motivation, which I mentioned before. So we set clear goals. And because gender equality is something we were so affected and emotionally affected by it, we just had a very high internal motivation, and we felt this internal motivation by a lot of people we spoke to. It was great to have IFSA for that. So we were so well supported by IFSA members, by the whole wheel, by everybody we asked to. We got great feedback on writing, on social media. So it really became a collective action of youth. And again, it was great to have diverse backgrounds, knowledge, and experiences. And as well, which was very important for us too, was that we also were supported by researchers and experts. So we reached out to people we knew before who were working on the topic to get specific feedback, which was also quite good because, of course, it was the first time writing an open letter. And of course, you can do research about it, but it's so great if you actually have the possibility to ask somebody you know before and be like, hey, do you think this sentence is good? And then you can still discuss within your team if you agree or disagree. So these were the points which were very important for us throughout the process of writing an open letter. And the great result was that we published an open letter on gender and forest education this year. It's a clear statement from a student's perspective, and we have 4 main demands, which are supported by sub-demands. The link will be in this presentation, and you can just also Google IFSA open letter and gender and forestry education if you want to dive deeper into it. But yes, first demand, counteract structural discrimination. Second, implement a gender-aware learning environment. Third, introduce and highlight the role models for FINTER students. And fourth, increase existing knowledge and networks. To get this great open letter, which we were so happy when it was finally out to the world, we sent it out via email to policymakers, organizations, and also all the IFSA LCs. So it ended up being a 3-page document and sending it out to everyone. And the second thing, which we were very happy about, I'm not sure if this is working right now, but we also distributed it by video. And we had a lot of people, a lot of IFSA members giving us their voices to read out the open letter. It's in total an 8-minute video, which you can watch on the website. But if this now works out, we can watch a 1-minute video of it. And you can see, a lot of the people which joined this great process.
We, the International Forestry Students Association, call for gender equality in forest education and for a gender-aware learning environment.
We want students and young professionals of all genders to have the same opportunities in education, their choice of study, and personal development.
We call for higher visibility and acceptance of all genders in forestry science and practices through gender-aware education and the accountability for the lack of accessibility due to gender-related structural questions. Yes, so I don't know, it still gives me goosebumps every time. I hope you could actually hear the audio as well. If not, please go to the website and or to YouTube and watch the video. It was really a great honor of how many people gave us their voices. And yes, I just have, I think, 2 more points to mention. The results were, from our point of view, on a political level and also on a personal level. Starting with the political level, we got positive and encouraging feedback from organizations and university. We were invited to international panel discussions and also discussions just in meetings. And they definitely new collaboration and projects developed, and it was great which feedback we got through this open letter. On a personal level, we definitely celebrated this achievement of working on it. It was an empowerment for ourselves and everybody who was involved through sharing the experience of writing the open letter, but also discussing about the content. It was a very good experience of how we can grow together and learn from each other. And again, the diverse connection we made. There's so many ideas out there after this open letter, and I'm very excited for this IFSA term. So just to wrap up our next steps, the open letter is supposed to be a point of departure for conversation and changes towards a more gender-aware education within forestry. So when people read it, we want them to discuss about it. And yes, so concrete next steps are that we want to further distribute the open letter, especially through IFSA LCs. We're going to translate the open letter into different languages, starting with Spanish. And we want to develop a QR code, which for easier dissemination, for giving context and making the open letter more readable and more accessible to more people. And yeah, I hope I'm still on time, but thank you so much. And yeah, please read the open letter.
Thank you, Teresa. And yes, you were on time. And thank you both, Amos, also for giving us more information and insight about the process and the points that highlight the youth call for action and also the open letter on gender and forest education. I want to invite to Amos to join us at the stage. I know that the advocacy actions can be challenging and frustrating sometimes. So I want to know what were the challenges and also maybe the frustrations that you face carrying out these activities needed to develop the youth call for action and also the open letter. Please, Amos, we'll start with you.
I think in terms of developing the call to action, there was quite much a lot of willingness from young people, from youth to participate. The most important thing was, I mean, it happened at a time. I can imagine if you wanted something in person where there is even much more interactiveness and where there is much more input, you would be limited by resources. But the biggest challenge in this advocacy space in developing this youth call for action was always the question of, so you have developed it, where is it going and what will it achieve? That question, you need to answer it, because you're developing a call to action where you're targeting policymakers. But the call to action is not a negotiated document. If you are bringing it to, if you're coming to UN spaces, if you're coming to international forest policy making, these are spaces where negotiations happen. Every word that enters in a policy document is negotiated by the member states. And so we, as a group of youth, young people, we have come together from around the world. We have discussed, we have had dialogues, we've had agreements on what should go into this document. But then you bring it to the main international stage, to the attention of the member states who are supposed to act on some of these points, and they have to start renegotiating the words, the points of that's where it gets very difficult. They have to negotiate and they have to agree with certain terms. And so it makes it very difficult to actually push this in the international scene or the stages where there are negotiated policy outcomes. I think that's the biggest challenge to this in this advocacy space.
Teresa, please, your answer.
Yeah, I think it was different for the open letter, because I think that, of course, we send it out to organizations, policymakers, and universities. But for us, the most important step was actually to get the message out there from a student's perspective, which hasn't been heard before. Even like research on gender and forestry education, hasn't been so developed so far. So it's just been very great, as the Gender Subcommission is just like a year and a half old now, or more than a year, to connect, to network, to hear from people, and especially to share experience within IFSA, to hear from different parts of the world that it's the same issue we are talking about. Maybe there are different nuances. Amos said it earlier in his presentation that, of course, there are different issues which you want to focus on, but in the end, you have the same goal, the same big issue, big problem to tackle. So yeah, we definitely, to be honest, I think we were very surprised by how much positive and great feedback we got, and invitations to collaborate and to be invited and to be on a stage, basically giving youth and FinTech students a voice. So yeah, and we sent the open letter out again just a month ago, and again got new feedback, got new people involved. So yes, we are, I think, very, very happy looking into the future, what comes out of it more.
Well, I am happy to hear that. Unfortunately, we are running out of time, but I will invite the audience to spread both the Youth Call for Actions and the open letter on gender and forest education through your networks. Now we will have a 10-minute break, and I invite to our audience to go straight after the break to the sessions and join to the different panel sessions that we will have for you during the rest of the day. I would like to thank again to Teresa and Amos for joining us today, and continue your advocacy into the policy area and also on gender.